carefully go through the corridor, looking for traps. Roll a perception check. 16. Suddenly, the ground underneath your feet gives way, revealing a pit full of deadly spikes as you plummet into it. Roll up a new character. Again? Why didn't I spot the trap? Well, real traps would be well hidden, so they're not easily spotted. They wouldn't work otherwise. And why am I dead? I still have 25 hit points. A real trap would be deadly. That's the whole point of a trap. Hello and welcome to my dungeon. Traps have been a part of the RPG ever since the first D&D players set foot into the first dungeon. But the way many published adventures and GMs handle traps is annoying and boring at best, and frustrating at worst. In this example, a character died to a trap just because of a single failed perception check. Sure, this might be realistic, as the GM explained, but it is frustrating for the player. Let me give you two more examples. I carefully go through the corridor looking for traps. Roll a perception check. 8. You fail to notice a spiked pit trap. You fall into it for 14 points of damage. Oh shit. Guys, get me out of here. We pull him out with the rope. Then I cast Cure Wounds on him. Thanks. Sorry for wasting spell slot. Now, this second example is less frustrating for the player, since the character survived and the negative effects from the trap can be mitigated. But apart from using up some of the party's healing resources, the trap's not doing anything. The trap is just annoying. On to my last example. I carefully go through the corridor looking for traps. Roll a perception check. 16. You spot a trapdoor at the corridor in front of you. Probably some kind of pit trap. I try to disarm it. Sure, roll on Thieves' Tools. 14. You manage to disarm the trap and continue through the corridor. Now in this third example, the trap is just a series of 2 skill checks. And this is just boring. But traps are part of our role-playing game, our game. Traps should not be annoying, frustrating or boring. Traps should be fun and engaging. So, how do we achieve that? You have to change the way you think about traps. Instead of thinking about them as realistic, deadly devices to maim and kill, or as a skill challenge for the characters, you should think about traps as a puzzle. Something to challenge the creative problem-solving skills of your players. You describe to them whatever dastardly contraption is blocking their way, and they have to come up with a solution to safely disarm, bypass, or trip it so they can continue on their adventure. Supposedly, this is how traps were run in the first edition of D&D, which had no skill or even ability checks. I wouldn't know, I'm not that old, but this certainly was a revelation for me when I read it in Noah's Zine. And I have run traps this way ever since and never looked back. Allow me to explain to you how to make this approach work step by step, and then give you a few more examples. If stuff like this interests you, consider liking the video down below and subscribing to my channel. There's more where this came from. To use traps as a puzzle, the characters must first spot the trap, so you can describe it to them, meaning you want your PCs to spot the trap. But traps are supposed to be well hidden. They wouldn't work otherwise. True, but that does not change the fact that you want them to be spotted. So, how do you solve this contradiction? Personally, if my group is carefully moving through a dungeon, watching out for traps, I just let them spot it. No roll required. But I want them to be looking for traps. moving carefully with a good source of light in their hands. If they just rush through the dungeon relying on dark vision alone, they will find the traps when they walk into them. Although that never happens. If you tell your players before the adventure how you plan to run traps, they should take the necessary precautions. Maybe give them a warning in the form of rumors of deadly traps before they enter the dungeon, or in the form of a sprung trap, the remains of the last victim still inside of it at the beginning of the dungeon. But maybe you want to create the illusion that the traps are well hidden. In that case, you might want to ask your players what they are doing to spot traps. What precautions are they taking? Describe how they only spotted it because of their precautions. And if you really want to do a perception check, just don't tell your group the DC. Let everyone roll, then just say that the character with the highest roll barely made the check, whatever that roll might be. And continue to describe the trap. When everyone rolls, there's usually a decently high roll among them. If not, this trap just happened to be very easy to spot, or you can describe how they spot it at the last possible moment before they step into it. Now comes the fun part. How to design traps that make good puzzles. You can approach this from two sides. From the player side, they have the options of disarming, bypassing, or tripping the trap. Try to think about an interesting way that the PCs might do one of these three things, and then imagine what kind of trap they could solve with this. Or you approach it from the trap builder side. How is the trap built? How is it triggered? What happens when it is triggered? Let the players worry about disarming, bypassing, or tripping it. Let's start with the trigger. The trap somehow needs to detect when a victim steps into it, and you want it to be a relevant victim, so a random rat does not trigger your elaborate trap. There are four usual ways to achieve this. Pressure plates that react to a certain pressure, either with a spring or a counterweight. They will trigger when something heavier than 20 pounds or so steps onto them, so they don't trigger for a rat, but they will trigger for a halfling. Or you could use a tripwire that springs the trap when something pulls on it with enough force. You could have an optical trigger. In a low-tech world, that would be a guard watching the area, pulling on a lever to spring the trap manually when they see an intruder stepping into the area. And finally, we have a magical trigger that detects either a living creature, a certain kind of creature, or has exceptions for certain creatures. In a high-tech world, you could have a lot more different triggers, but in a fantasy game, you can concentrate on these four. Whatever the case, it's important to be clear about the location and the size of the trigger, as this is the most important aspect of bypassing the trap. The bigger the area covered by the trigger, the harder it is to get around, or triggers. There could be more than one trigger for the trap. The second aspect of trap design is the mechanism. The aim of the trap is usually to harm or hold a victim, but it might also be an alarm trap, just to alert the guards, or a combination of the three. It's important to come up at least with a few aspects of the mechanism here, because interfering with the mechanism is how you disarm the trap. To come up with the mechanism, think about the source of energy that the trap is using. There's a number to choose from. Gravitational potential. Something is dropped or dropped into. This might be pit traps the victims are dropped into, or something dropped onto a victim from above. Or it might be a weight dropping, pulling on a rope or chain to drive a more complex mechanism. Spring potential. Mechanical energy is stored in a spring. That might be something like a crossbow or an iron bear trap, but also the spring in a clockwork mechanism that triggers in turn another source of energy. Chemical potential. A chemical reaction happens when the trap is triggered. This is typically combined with some kind of mechanical mechanism. The chemical can take the form of something combustible like gasoline, or an acid, or a poison. Electrical potential. This usually takes the form of some kind of battery. The electric discharge might be damaging, or it just might be part of the trigger mechanism for a different kind of energy. Magical potential. I can't tell you exactly what this might be, as that is the nature of magic, but it is usually combined with a magical trigger into a magical trap. Whatever energy the trap uses, it is important that the PCs can interact with at least part of the mechanism, maybe in a roundabout way, as this is how they disable the trap. They have to come up with a way to destroy part of the trigger mechanism or block it, so it cannot release the energy powering the trap. The energy source is also important for the effect of the trap and the possibility to safely trigger it. How big is the destruction wrought by the trap? How big is the affected area? Is it safe to traverse the trap after it is sprung? And how loud is the trap? This all sounds like dry theory at this point, so let me give you a few more examples. I carefully go through the corridor looking for traps. As you carefully move through the corridor, setting one foot in front of the other, you notice that the stonework right in front of you is slightly different. It is skewed, slightly skewed towards the middle of the corridor. How big is that skewed section? It goes from wall to wall for about 30 feet. Anything else suspicious on the walls or the ceiling? No, they look perfectly normal. I try to poke it with my 10-foot pole. You poke the ground with your pole, and at first nothing happens. Only when you put quite a bit of weight onto it does the floor give away, revealing a spiked pit trap beneath. Once you release the pressure, the trapdoor swings back into place. It's probably held up by some kind of counterweight. Alright, classic spiked pit trap. How do you get past this one, guys? I've got some iron spikes and a hammer. How about I nail these in between the gap between the trap door and the floor on our side to really wedge it into place? Let's try that. I test the strength of the floor again with my pole once the nails are in place. I take out 3 spikes and I nail them into the gap on the left side. You nail them into place, and after testing you find that the trapdoor on the left is now jammed. Alright, nice idea, but let's cross it one at a time just to be on the safe side. You cross the jammed trap one at a time and continue through the corridor. At the end of the corridor you spot a metal reinforced wooden door. I carefully go through the tunnel looking for traps. As you press deeper into the murky cave, you notice a growing stench, similar to manure. Ugh, smells like fart. Anything else? Anything on the walls or the ceiling? The tunnel ahead of you goes down for about 10 feet before leveling out again. You notice some cracks in the walls at the tunnel up ahead, about a hand wide. I take a closer look at those cracks. Wait! Farts are flammable. And methane's heavier than air. It will gather in that lower section. Damn, you're right. That might be natural gas seeping from those cracks. We have to extinguish our torches to get through there. Then stumble around in the dark. Well, you've got your 10-foot pole. I also don't want to breathe that crap. We'd have to rush through, hoping to reach the end before we run out of breath. Or we could burn it off, Fire arrow from distance. Let's do that. We improvise a fire arrow with some bandages and a bit of lamp oil and then shoot it into that pit from as far away as possible. You shoot the arrow and it streaks in a shining line through the darkness ahead, then vanishes into the lower section. For a moment you can't see anything. Then, with the roaring thunder of the explosion, a wall of flame comes rolling from the pit. We hit the deck. The flames pass over you, moving along the ceiling. The tunnel is now filled with smoke and dust, but otherwise, the way ahead is now clear. Now, that will alert every creature in this dump that we're here. We should prepare for a fight. I draw my sword. I go towards that corridor, checking for traps. As you approach, you notice a reflection of your torchlight on the ground before you. Faint golden lines, almost too thin to be perceived by the eye. I crouch down and take a closer look, careful not to touch anything. Upon closer inspection, you see that there's a circle inlaid with golden wire into the floor. Strange glyphs are arranged inside of the circle. Oh great, it's a magical doohickey trap. It's your expertise. Indeed it is. Let me take a closer look. Do I recognize these magical glyphs? Give me an Arcana check. Curses, just a 3. No glyphs you've ever seen. Right then. I cast Identify. Reveal your secrets to me! With the help of your spell, you discern that it is a lightning. Any humanoid passing through that circle is struck by lightning. There seems to be an exception to that rule, though. You can make out a certain glyph. You can make out a certain glyph that marks these exceptions. Damn it. We'd have to push someone into that trap to trigger it. And who knows how many charges it has. Actually, with Identify, you would know that it has 13 charges. Now that is a steep cost of human life just to get past here. I could polymorph us into cats. Then we can just prance past this cantrip, since cats are no humanoids. That would be correct. Hold on to your spell slots. Didn't that cult leader we encountered at the entrance have some kind of amulet with a glyph on it? I take out that amulet and I check if it has the same glyph on it as in the magic circle. Checking the blood-stained amulet, you see that it is indeed the same glyph. Great. Now we need to find 2 more of these things. There must be other groups of cultists somewhere in this dungeon. Fighters. The solution is much more trivial. Polymorph? No. You shall pass this circle with the amulet, and then you throw it back to him, so that he shall pass, and he shall repeat the process with me. Thus, all 3 of us can pass the trap with just 1 amulet. Of course. I put the amulet around my neck, and then I cross the magic circle. As you can see from these examples, a trap must not necessarily be a huge obstacle to challenge your players, but the bigger and more elaborate the trap, the longer it usually takes your group to come up with a solution. Also note that you don't know beforehand what ideas your players come up with. There's always more than one solution for this kind of puzzles, likely some of which you never thought of when coming up with the trap. As always, you should be open to the ideas of your players and don't demand that they come up and implement the solutions that you came up with. And depending on how the players choose to solve the puzzle, there can be different consequences. Time spent and resources used up, spell slots expended, innocents sacrificed, or guards alerted to the group's presence. There are choices to be made and consequences to be had which is part of the fun of an RPG. Now, let me put a question to you. What are the best trap designs you ever came up with? Let's make the comment section of this video a huge trap resource for everyone to take inspiration from. There are of course more uses for traps than just as puzzles. You can, for example, use them to spice up encounters. But this video is getting long enough, so that will have to wait for another video. For now, I bid thee farewell, dreamers, until we shall meet again.